Good day and welcome to Ideas Pod at Raisina Dialogue 2025. My name is Elizabeth Sidiropoulos. I'm the Chief Executive at the South African Institute of International Affairs. And the discussion today is going to be from Cape Town to Capitol Hill. A discussion about the G20, South Africa's presidency, lessons to be learned, and how the handover to the United States that chairs it in 2026 will play out. With me, I have a really eminent panel to be able to discuss these issues and probably some of the geopolitical elements as well. To my extreme right, I have Professor Victoria Panova from HSC University, the Rector of HSC University, head also of the BRICS Expert Council representing Russia, a woman 20 Sherpa, also for Russia, and a good friend, I may add. And then to my immediate right, Keiti Rocha Gomes, who has recently joined IPEA, which is the Planning and Economic Institute under the Brazilian government, under the Ministry of Planning, and is the director there of international development, international partnership, international studies. So really good to have you with us. Let me actually kick off with the immediate previous G20 presidency, which of course was that of Brazil, South Africa chairing it this year. And I'd like to ask you, I mean, from your engagement in the G20 in Brazil, also watching how the official tracks and the geopolitical elements played themselves out, what can we take away from that in terms of lessons for this year and indeed for the following year?
Okay, thank you for this question. I think that the crucial lesson that you can take from the Brazilian presidency, but not only from the Brazilian presidency, but from all the developing countries' presidents, we had the last four presidents of the G20 was held by the developing countries. And I think that it was a good opportunity to put on the forefront of the debate the perspective of developing countries, not only the issues, not only the priorities, not only actions or policies, but mainly the perspective of the developing countries and how you can, from our perspective, to find global solutions. So, and I'm happy to see that now under the South Africa presidency, we have a continuity of this perspective. We are continuity with the priority, a continuity with the way we think the world. And I think it's a legacy, not only to G20, but also to many others international forums, multilateral forums. And I believe that we change the way we think the world, we address problems, and how you can build together a solution. The principle of solidarity, it was reinforced by the Brazilian presidency, but also for the many developing countries. And just to conclude, you put inequality in the front of the debate, And inequality requires a systemic view. Inequality invites us to think the global problems and to find a global solution, but to look at the world systemically, because inequality is a systemic problem. So it was, I think, the good legacy, not only the Brazil, but also South Africa and our developing countries' presidencies.
Yeah, of course, South Africa has built on that. Its strapline is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Really building on both the issues of, particularly on the issue of inequality. South Africa, unfortunately, has also very similarly with Brazil, the highest Gini coefficient, a legacy of our troubled past, apartheid past, and so these are very fundamental to us. But I want, before I move to Victoria, I want to ask you one more question relatedly. Moving towards 2026, with the US taking over the presidency of the G20. I mean, many of these issues that South Africa, that Brazil, India, Indonesia have put on the agenda over the last 4 years. And indeed, even countries from the global north in the past, they've driven some of the reforms. I mean, you know, we've heard from the Trump administration, it's not keen on issues of climate and sustainability. It believes it's been given a hard deal in global affairs. It's been taken advantage of. So how do you see that potentially playing out in terms of the priorities of the U.S. administration? That maybe is an unfair question, but let's have a go at it.
It's not an easy question, and we had a lot of this debate on this issue yesterday here in Raisina, and I think that I could add a different point of view that I have listened around. Of course, we are going to face a very uncertain environment, and I think the focus on issues that normally the developing countries put on the table is different from the issues and perspective that you see when you have the only developed countries discussion the global problems. So it is already expected that we are going to see some setback in some emphasis on some issues that normally that you had put on the table. But under U.S. administration 2026, I think that you probably are going to see a reduction on the emphasis and importance of agenda like climate change, sustainability, and also inequalities. But I think that the good news that it's not forever. It's not going go for a long time. I think it's important to remark that G20 was created in a context of a big uncertainty that was created by the financial crisis in 2008. And the G20 is a response to this context of a big uncertainty, and it is a mechanism to find or think together on global solutions from the perspective that if you have on the table only developed countries, probably you have a limited or a restricted view of the problems. And now we are going to face another uncertain moment. So in this moment, I think that G20 could in the opposite way, get more space, and it's a source of hope a source of hope and a source of the dialogue to get different voices in order to try to navigate these uncertain moments next year.
Right. I'm gonna pose the same question to you, Victoria,
about their upcoming presidency.
Yeah, and how do we create bridges?
So, you know, first of all, let me give you probably a slightly different perspective. I totally agree with you that probably the last 4 years, including this year, created a momentum for the G20 as we had Indonesia, India, then Brazil and South Africa. Especially, I would even argue that we're not sure how much of the G20 would have been still here if it were not for your countries presiding over these years, because we had an extreme geopolitical turbulence coming in. And in fact, don't forget, 2020, it was Saudi Arabia, so also from their developing countries front. And we had another, not geopolitical, but also very important socio-economic and health, issue with the pandemic. And this was the biggest challenge to us. So the G20 should say thank you to your countries for being still here. And from the very start, I would even go to 1999 when the G20 was initially created, still on the level of finance ministers and central bank governors. We remember that there was this story when the Western world, as the G7, for some time it was the G8, but in essence, it was the G7 thinking always. They realized, okay, we're not the only ones on the block nowadays. So, yes, we are, in fact, creating the crisis sometimes. We are the sources of it, but we have to manage it all together with the developing world, which gained importance with their GDP growing, with their not only economy, but their technological reach, their political reach. It grew. And we remember they tried to, in fact, Americans tried to introduce a number of other groupings, but it was deliberate, right? G33, G22, but it never lived for long because it didn't take into account the real systemic different changes in the world. And what we saw that the G20, when it was agreed and together with the countries that did matter, like India, China, Brazil, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, right? Turkey, South Korea. So with those countries in mind, there was a decision that, yes, okay, let's go ahead and try to make the world different. And also the idea behind it that it was more geoeconomic. It was not about politics. Because even before the series of crises that we saw over the past years, it was clear that, the paths are not always, let's say they're diverging. They go in different ways. But economy, we're living on the same planet. And we have to overcome their incoming challenges. And there has to be a platform for that. And G20 provided for that platform. And we remember in 2008, it allowed for business to calm down and, in fact, start gaining some trust. We remember not all their issues were taking, let's say, having concrete decisions, and not all the decisions that were taken were honored. Let's look at protectionist measures. Yeah. But nevertheless, it calmed down and allowed to overcome the crisis. So with the next year, with a Capitol Hill, what is important is that, in fact, we went through the whole cycle. United States were the first to host it. We're coming back to the initiator once again. So
I want to ask you on that point then. You talked about 1999 as a pivotal moment when the G7, G8 realized that they can't do things alone. And it was a finance minister. And we got to 2008. That was another pivotal moment, another financial crisis. Now we don't have a financial crisis, but we have a shift, a significant geopolitical shift. Do you think this is the next milestone, that the G20 after 2026 is going to be a very different animal?
I'm not saying it as a milestone as 2026 itself. Yeah. I would say that we are living in a historic moment because United States having a very different stance now, but realizing itself as a sovereign power with its interests. And that's what's key. All the G20 countries, they are sovereign states, minding their interests, but in order to achieve global common good. At least that's the ideal, how we are expecting it to see. So what we need to do, and maybe it's still the time for South African presidency, as, the last before the bringing it back to United States, to evaluate what we've done, where we failed, or what we managed to achieve, not only in small projects, but generally. And then I think it will be much easier to come with this evaluated legacy to Americans, because they will have their own priorities. Some of them will ring to our bells, some not. Yeah. But I think we need to make this homework before, together with them, before this new cycle starts.
So just to add to what you're saying in terms of the evaluation, one of the priorities that the South African government has put on the agenda is to, in fact, undertake a review of the G20 over the last. It's G20 at 20, but strictly speaking, it's 2008 to 2025, and I think that will be extremely useful. The one, it has also identified a number of themes that hopefully can carry through, particularly themes that are very relevant for Africa. And one of the biggest ones is debt and cost of capital. And it will be interesting to see how we take that forward, even though sort of addressing the African debt problem is is a much smaller, in terms of values, really.
Or reform of the financial
and reform of the financial
institutions. We did it at the
institution.
very beginning, but not afterwards.
But I want to ask you two quick questions to both of you very quickly, because we're running out of time. Do you think that the agenda of the G20 needs to go back to basics? It started off really as the premier institution on global economic governance, driving consensus on reform, on managing the system, etc., etc. Its agenda has expanded. It happens when you go to summit level. But should we go back to basics? Let's start with you, Keiti.
I think yes. Not only in G20, but because the world is moving back. When in many panels you have had here during this conference, we see the word of a new economic order or a new financial architecture, international financial architecture. So the orange of the G20 was to discuss the international financial system. So it means discuss also the economic order and the financial order of the world. So and the world is coming back to this point. So consequently, the G20, in my point of view, should come to the orange and discuss this better, because it's the essence of our multilateralism and our economic lives.
Of course, the important thing there is to make sure that it's cross-cutting, because the international financial architecture affects everything.
Everything.
Okay.
Everything.
Money does make the world go round often. Victoria.
I'm not sure about how terming it as going back. Right? Maybe back to basics, but, in fact, nowadays it rings a different bell to us, because when we talk about new financial architecture, it's not about only IMF, which I mentioned, right? And their quota system, but it's also about what are their, can dollar be used as a weapon? It should not. The system, financial system, economic system should be transparent, should be open and equitable for all the countries. And I think this is where, with the complete depoliticization, as far as how much possible is it, we'll still have to see. But the G20 would do much good if it goes around those issues already on a new level of their historical twist.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we could discuss the issues of G20, both economic and political, because it is very much a political organization or informal grouping as well. But let's see. We have another few months of the South African presidency, even though this panel has the really great name of playing with words. From Cape Town to Capitol Hill, the seas, the South African summit will be in Johannesburg. And many of these issues, I think, are going to be front of mind, both for the South Africans and indeed as we prepare to engage with the US to hand over to them next year. Thank you very much.